The head of WHO Smallpox Secretariat, Dr. Rosamund Lewis, explains what monkeypox is.
Monkeypox is not a new disease. It's been described for at least 40 years, and it's been well studied in the African region. We've seen a few cases in Europe over the last 5 years, just in travelers, but this is the first time we're seeing cases across many countries at the same time in people who have not traveled to the endemic regions in Africa. Why this virus is now becoming more frequently reported, because it is well known to be, as you said, a zoonotic disease. So it is primarily in the animal kingdom, in forested areas. Now we're seeing it more in urban areas, and this week we're seeing it for the first time around the world. So let's just say right off the top that monkeypox and COVID are not the same disease. It's caused by a different virus and it spreads in a different manner. The way it does spread is through close physical contact. People who have monkeypox do develop a rash, and that rash, if you touch it, that can be contagious. So it is person-to-person close contact spread when it's within families or within social networks where close contact happens. The mutation rate is much lower than for RNA viruses, and so it's a very stable virus. So we don't yet have evidence that there's mutation in the virus itself. Earlier, some of the typical early symptoms, which tend to be fever, headache, lethargy, backache, and this usually lasts for a day or two. We call it the prodromal period. That resembles many other things, of course, in the early days, first day or two. Then a rash begins, and the rash is has traditionally in the past been very classical for monkeypox, which is it starts with what we call macules. These are just red areas. Then it progresses to papules, and papules is something you can feel. It's raised. Then it progresses to vesicles, for which the regular term would be blisters, which is why it can be confused with chickenpox, for example. Chickenpox also appears as blisters on the skin. Then it progresses to pustules, so these little blisters can begin to fill with a whitish fluid that looks like pus, and so they are called pustules. After that, they begin to dry and scab, and after that, the scab falls off. That is the classic progression of the rash. In terms of the body itself, the classic progression is face and then to limbs, palms of the hands, soles of the feet, and then to the body itself. That also is a classically described progression. Another classic picture for monkeypox from past years is the swollen lymph nodes. You might recall that the World Health Organization and all countries of the world eradicated smallpox. And the eradication of smallpox was declared in 1980. And so that disease no longer exists. It shows that some things are containable, even when they've been around for a very long time. The reason I raise this now is that at the time of eradication of smallpox, monkeypox had already been identified in people. 1970 was the first time. So we had a period of about 10 years when we had a little bit of both. And the distinction between smallpox and monkeypox was the swollen lymph nodes. If a child had swollen lymph nodes, it was more likely to be monkeypox than smallpox. So these are some of the things we know already, because countries that are familiar with this infection, this infection that comes from the animals in the forest actually, they are familiar with this, and so this is what has been classically described for a long time. What we are seeing today, still we have that picture, but we also have a higher proportion of cases where the rash may begin a bit more locally and it may remain a bit more locally. Possibly because of the nature of the contact, again, we don't know, but we're seeing more cases where the rash begins in the genital area, which is not new. That has always been there, but it's more frequent now, and sometimes it tends to stay there. So it's also possible that the rash may not be visible because it may be covered. If it doesn't reach your hands or your face, then it may not be seen. However, it does remain important to consult your healthcare provider, because that rash can even contaminate your bed sheets, your clothes, and so on. And so you don't want to expose people in your family, for example, or your other social contacts to contaminated materials, which is also one way in which monkeypox can spread.